now we will switch to the second speaker of this session, Connor O'Neill, who is a student of General Linguistics and German Philology at Palatka University. So his presentation is titled "Writing of the Mind," and without any further ado, the floor is yours, and I will do some camera exchange so we can see him as the main performer. Wait, a little tiny bit, and voila, this is Connor.
All right, we can see me? Perfect. Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Elvira, for the introduction. Yes, today I'd like to talk about Derrida's essay, Freud and the Scene of Writing.
Wait, sorry. You have to share the screen. That would be fantastic.
I'm so sorry.
If you could do that.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Let me figure out how to do this. Yeah, hold on. Oh, I have to full screen this first. Okay.
You just put the share.
Right here.
Big green button.
All right, perfect.
And then just share the second. Write down. Yes.
Application windows.
Yes.
Okay.
And you share it instantly.
All right, thank you guys. There we go. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about Derrida's lectures on Freud and his kind of interpretation of Freud. I'm assuming most of you guys come from a semiotics and linguistics background. Derrida obviously is very inspired a lot more from philosophy and phenomenology. So I think I would really hope that some of us in the audience are a little bit more well-read in phenomenology and philosophy than I am, so that at the end we can maybe have a large discussion about this, maybe connect some possible misinterpretations from a semiotic perspective of this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to introduce some basics of Derrida, his deconstruction, différance or différence. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Basically, just give us a framework through which Derrida kind of understands and studies different things, mostly history of philosophy as well as literature. Then we're going to go a bit Freudian. I'm going to introduce to you guys the idea of fraying, Bahnung, the mystic writing pad. I'm going to compare that to Derrida's idea of difference or difference. Excuse my pronunciation. And then we're going to go into dreams a little bit and talk about transcription of dreams, and the overall kind of writing system that Derrida says we have in our heads. It's quite interesting. And then I'll wrap it up with talking about arc writing. And I'll have a big question for some of you guys who have read Derrida, who are read in phenomenology, because I'm a bit confused about arc writing, and from my readings I couldn't find. Well, I'll get to there at the end. So deconstruction, of course, for those who are familiar with Derrida, is his kind of main method of investigation. We're not really dismantling anything with deconstruction necessarily. What Derrida means with deconstruction is he's looking at traditional oppositions in Western philosophy that are hierarchically organized. For example, nature and culture, or even speech and writing. I'll go ahead and give an example with nature and culture, just if there are any, I guess, non-semioticians, non-linguists in the audience. We have this idea that from nature emerges culture. This was a very, especially 18th century view. I believe Rousseau might have believed this. Please do not crucify me if I'm wrong. However, the idea that culture kind of emerges from nature is still our cultural understanding of this opposition. what Derrida is trying to say is that one doesn't come from the other, but the two things are kind of unidirectional in character, and they don't necessarily presuppose one another. They both exist together simultaneously. What he talks about in his work of grammatology is exactly this with speech and writing. In traditional Western philosophy, there tends to be this assumption that writing is a product of speech, that speech is the absolute pure kind of way of mapping reality, while writing is just a kind of lesser version of speech, that it can very easily be misinterpreted, that it's not, the exact, it doesn't convey 100% exactly what the speaker wants to say in the way that speech does. And that is logocentrism, this kind of idea in traditional Western philosophy that speech is kind of presupposes writing. Yes, that language is a transparent tool for representing pre-existing meaning, that there might be an almost one-to-one correlation with the language and the world, that language kind of maps onto the world. And Derrida really disagrees with this. Yes. So this is the kind of first term that Derrida uses to distinguish his oppositions, is deference. Deference is the idea that meaning is never completely 100% present, and that if we take a sign, you cannot interpret the meaning of a sign just using that sign alone. You interpret the sign through its oppositions to other signs and through past signs that you have seen, through traces, through this idea of traces. So basically, I guess if you've been exposed to certain signs in the past, that's going to kind of shape the way you make meaning of new signs, the way you interpret them. This is a very, I guess, basic way of saying that. And when you are interpreting through difference, you perform this action called deferral. You defer. And that's when you kind of go through unconsciously this chain of meanings relating the sign to all of the other signs you've seen before, all of the traces, and you will use that to predict the signs you will see in the future. Derrida refers to this as haunting from the future. It is a kind of continuous, infinite process of differentiation and deferral. So this is difference. I use this picture. I tried to get AI to kind of visualize a few of Derrida's ideas. Very unsuccessful, obviously, because I don't know how this relates to differences at all, but oh well. So in Derrida's Freud and the Seed of Writing, where he kind of deconstructs language and compares his deconstruction of language to Freud's ideas on language and the subconscious, Derrida was able to find that there was this kind of development of thoughts within Freud's writing. In 1895, when Freud published, or not published, but wrote, it was published in 1950, his project for a scientific psychology, Freud basically introduced his idea of Wahrnehmung, of Frey, and which we'll introduce later. And in this kind of his original thoughts of how memory is produced, or how memory is recorded, how we interpret new things based on those memories, he didn't really conceptualize it too much yet. He conceptualized it in terms of paths, in terms of networks. But over time, Freud eventually almost 100% brought this new way of thinking. He used a completely, he had kind of transformed this concept into a metaphor of writing over time. So after the idea of Wahrnehmung, of fraying or breaching, depending on the translation that you read, he has this idea of the mystic pad. If you guys are into psychoanalysis or into Freud, you might have already heard about that. I'll explain that in just a bit. And then when we get to Traumdeutung, when we get to his interpretation of dreams, he almost completely, according to Derrida, uses metaphors of writing to kind of conceptualize the unconscious mind and how we interpret and interact and perceive the world overall. So I have a few quotes here just so we can kind of understand what Derrida is saying here. And then, so I'll read this out loud and then we'll kind of I'll talk about what I got from this. So he says, imagine we have these kind of paths in our brain, these certain connections that are connected to certain events. Fraying is when this sort of these kind of molecules have a new path carved through them, correct? So there would be two kinds of neurons after the process of fraying. Derrida uses the word neurons. So there's neuron A and neuron B. He uses different symbols, but I couldn't type them out on the laptop. Neuron A offers resistance and thus retains no trace of impression. And it would be more like, I guess, perceptual neurons. And the other ones would oppose contact barriers to the quantity of excitation and would thus retain the printed trace. So they offer the possibility of representing darzustellen, memory. Darstellen isn't exactly 100% to represent. Darstellen is more of a visual, slight representation. There are a few important words here in the translation of Freud. I get the minor nuances that might change the way we kind of see these concepts. Also, of course, this is not at all biological. This is entirely metaphorical. Just so we can kind of make a model of how we're understanding. And so from this first quote, we can think that our mind is a field of pathways. And the more you walk through these pathways, the easier they become to kind of walk through. However, Freud takes these pathways one step further because it's not just the pathways in our brains that are important. What Derrida gets from Freud is that it is the difference between frayings, between these Bahnungen, which is the real origin of memory and thus the psyche. Only that the difference frees a preference of path, a Wegvorbezogung. Memory is represented, again, dargestellt, this kind of like mental image, by the differences in the frayings between the four neurons. So it is not the paths themselves that are important, it's the differences of the paths themselves. If we can think of a field of paths, we'll know which ones are different because of where they kind of go, not entirely because of the path itself. It's the differences, it's the oppositions in these paths that create meaning. So it's not just the inscription of experience which we get this meaning from, it's the entirely kind of like opposition that these meanings create from each other. And this is almost entirely one-to-one what Derrida is saying with difference or difference. I'm going to keep on changing the pronunciation, which I apologize about. So we have this kind of system of difference which structures the psyche. The process of meaning making is through this this kind of process, according to Derrida. Yes, so that's going to be the bottom, the first kind of idea that Freud has in terms of having a metaphor to map out the mind. Later, Freud introduces the idea of the mystic writing pad. This is a very old type of writing pad. You have this thick wax layer, right? On top of that, you have a wax paper. And on top of that wax paper, you have a layer of cellulite. And let's say I want to write something with a stylus onto this, okay? I would be able to write something and I would kind of create indentions through the cellulite, which would kind of bend into the wax and make impressions into the wax. However, whenever I'm done writing, like I'll go ahead and see what I've already written, because the impressions that were made into the wax will be kind of folded, like the cellulite will kind of fold itself into the wax, and you will see the dark lines that you've written into. But then what you can do is you can lift up the wax paper and the text is completely invisible. The text is no longer there. However, the impressions are still left by the wax. There are deep impressions that are still left by the wax. And Freud uses this kind of metaphor for us to understand the unconscious and conscious minds. Our conscious mind being the cellulite, or not, the celluloid, and the wax being the unconscious that still has these impressions, no matter what. So he has this, I really like this metaphor, because you can also say, and of course this is metaphorical, I don't have any evolutionary or biological basis to support this, but I like the idea that the celluloid is there to kind of protect the wax layer from being too damaged or too scraped by the stylus. So you can kind of compare that with the conscious and the unconscious, that the conscious is kind of protecting the unconscious mind, because if the unconscious mind was directly interacted with, that could leave really bad scars and, of course, trauma. So this is the idea of the writing pad. And so I tried to make a picture of a wax brain, but AI image generation is not the most reliable. So this is another quote that Derrida says, his kind of personal comments on the writing pad. He says, "Let us note that the depth of the mystic pad is a depth without bottom, an endless reverberation, and a perfectly superficial exteriority, a stratification of surfaces, each of whose relation to self, whole inside, is but the implication of another similarly exposed surface. It joins the two empirical certainties by which we are constituted. Infinite depth in the implication of writing, of meaning, in the unlimited envelopment of the present, and the simultaneously, the molecular essence of being, and the absolute essence of grounding." So if we can imagine a kind of three-dimensional, always happening wax board that is constantly being etched on, constantly being the wax, the celluloid being risen up, making new impressions all the time based off of the past impressions. That is basically what Freud is trying to say, how our unconscious is working. So if we can connect this back to the paths, we can think of these impressions as paths. We're still interpreting these impressions through difference, through their difference with one another. We're still not just seeing them as paths in of themselves. And then we get to dreams as writing. At this point, Freud goes kind of full on. He brings the writing, he uses dreams, or he explains dreams as a complete, he uses the metaphor of writing to kind of explain how dreams work. It is Freud's idea that the dreams are kind of the unconscious, are things in our unconscious being, I guess, sorted out. So us seeing kind of signifiers of these traces, of these paths. They're metaphonetic, non-linguistic, alogical writing. So Freud, of course, he was very against the idea of this kind of almost religious sense that, okay, if you see this object in a dream, then that means this and this and this. Every single person in their dream, if we can think of dreams as the subconscious kind of expressing itself, and we have to decipher that, every single human being is going to have a completely different Rosetta Stone to understand that. So we want to see, Freud kind of visualizes dreams as a text in which every single object is a sign that has a certain meaning. And no one object in different people is ever going to be the same. There is no possible way that me seeing a spider in a dream is the same as someone else seeing a spider in a dream. And I'll talk about this in just the next slide. And yes, it's very, it is a language, but it's not linear. It's not phonetic. It's very different. And this is where the issue that Derrida brings up of translation and transcription. If we want to translate this text or even decipher this text at all, it could be completely impossible. I tried again to make an AI image, and I'll explain this in just a bit. So this is, I could be completely wrong in this interpretation of Derrida's interpretation of Freud. So please correct me or add your comments in the future if you'd like during the discussion. It seems to me that what is basically trying to be said is that we have this unconscious mind with these phrases that we kind of understand through differences. And when we dream, these phrases, we can think of them as signifieds, go through this weird, impossible, almost black box algorithm and manifest themselves as signifieds in dreams. So what that object in a dream can signify means something, but in order to decipher it, I think either takes an intense amount of psychoanalysis or is completely impossible to understand at all. So this is what I have tried to visualize, this kind of slop of random things, of chaos, of trauma that you have in the unconscious that translates to sheep jumping over fences, which is the kind of typical American idea of what people dream about. So you can try to, so the first deciphering it and understanding it on a personal level could be completely impossible because we do not know at all the relationship between the signifiants and the signifié. The second aspect that Derrida writes about, which is very difficult, is even transcribing or explaining the dream. Because when you explain these dreams, the words themselves inherently limit the kind of emotion and experience of that dream. There's no one way to say what is happening. And of course, in normal language, it might be difficult to say one feeling completely with 100% accuracy, but it is almost impossible to do so in dreams because dreams are so, according to Freud and Derrida's, what in my interpretation of Derrida's interpretation of Freud, is that these are very personal because these are, of course, different manifestations of the subconscious. And then this kind of brings us, I want to bring us back to Derrida's idea of writing. So it's interesting that in this time, both Freud and Derrida kind of, Derrida not explicitly, Freud not explicitly, but Derrida explicitly kind of deconstructed logocentrism in this sense. Derrida believes that writing is not at all a product of speech, but instead there exists this ability within us, this archewriting, which is a system that presupposes both speaking and writing, which we acquire through deference. Writing is already, of course, marked by absence and meaning that is never fully present. When we see different things, we think of what is not there subconsciously. And yeah, just as a path is created through Banu, through fraying, a trace can emerge from the repetition of differences rather than through the presence of full quantities. We can never, ever capture the full meaning of something. What I would like to ask before I kind of wrap things up is archewriting and also the idea of deference. Archewriting to me seems like a fancy way of explaining Saussure's idea of langue, the ability to already understand a language. I feel like I can already explain in Saussurian terms that langue is the ability we have to create meaning, to understand signs. And writing is almost as similar as parole. So parole, of course, is our physical manifestation of speech when we speak. But then writing is just the same thing. We're using that communication. In my opinion, or from my understanding, I don't necessarily understand the difference or the kind of novelty of arc writing whenever long already exists. However, it could be that perhaps deference is a lot more diachronic in nature, that we understand that Derrida kind of thinks we understand things completely diachronically through signs that we have already been exposed to in the past. But I would really like to ask, especially if there's anyone here who's read more phenomenology than I have. And yes, this is my bibliography. I used Derrida's Scene of Writing, a few of Freud's works, and yes, that was my presentation. I would like to thank you guys very much, and open to conversation. Please, phenomenologists, if you can add anything at all.
Fantastic. Thank you, Connor. Okay, so we will manage some sound issues. Wait a little bit, and we will mute somebody. Sorry, there's no freedom in sound in this event. But so yes, I will ask you to okay. No, this is the wrong. Stop it. This is the wrong. Wait. Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, you will let's open this space for the discussion of faceless people. So that's fantastic. So we have the first question in the room. So yes, Nick.
Connor, awesome presentation. I think you summarized Derrida and psychoanalysis. You know, they're very large topics, but I think you summarized them well and combined them well. So good job on that. What brought you to this focus? Like, what about Derrida and psychoanalysis interests you?
Honestly, I was just looking through the semiotics library, and I was already in a digital writing group where I had heard about Derrida's thoughts on writing, and then I saw his book in the library. I opened it up, and then I saw the chapter Freud and the Scene of Writing, and I thought, okay, let's check it out.
Yeah.
Let's do this little side quest.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're pretty, you could spend years in these topics. I don't know, the history of psychoanalysis is people spend like lives dedicated to studying that stuff. So yeah, no, Derrida, I think it's really interesting conversation. The topic of the mystic writing pad is interesting. Have you ever heard of Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari?
Yeah, Deleuze, absolutely.
They also write about, in Anti-Oedipus, they're kind of criticizing psychoanalysis, but they're also updating a lot of these concepts. So the concept of the mystic writing pad actually, the consciousness, unconsciousness, whatever it is, this kind of like collection of memories that are traced over time, right? Like you always have certain memories that are always there.
Yeah.
So it's a very good metaphor that I think deserves being here. And so anyway, yeah, a lot of these ideas, I think you could really get a lot of mileage out of if you kind of keep furthering your studies in that direction, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. Anti-Oedipus, I have it downloaded.
Yeah, it's a very weird book, but read the footnotes. The footnotes make the book make sense. That's kind of the key to Deleuze and Guattari.
Okay.
They reference a lot of things, but if you read the references, you're like, okay, now I get it. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Yes.
Okay, is there anyone else who would like to ask a question or give advice or share opinions? Yes, Jamin, please.
The question is from Martin Schwentner.
Hello.
Hello, good to see you guys. I would like to ask Connor, what do you mean exactly by, or can you give an example of some fully meaning, or what it could be? Because it seems to me a bit that your summary and interpretation of Derrida is a bit going in the way that you're posing it like you have something like fully meaning and contraposition of trace or difference. So perhaps it seems to me a bit one has to be more cautious with interpretation of Derrida because he spent a lot of time to not to fall into this distinction himself. Yeah. So can you say what do you mean by this fully meaning? What does it could mean possibly, or how one can portray it? Or yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Martin, for the question. It's good to see you again. Yes, so my kind of interpretation of full meaning is, I guess, goes back to the idea of presence and absence, as well as difference. So whenever, I guess, you hear or see a sign, you only think of that sign in terms of how it is different to the other signs you have seen in the past. I think what I mean, the full meaning is, I guess, you can't have the full meaning of that sign in it that you only interpret it in terms of what you have already been exposed to in the past. And it is probable that your interpretation of that sign will change in the future based off of future signs you are exposed to. So you can, that was kind of my interpretation when I was reading Derrida, what he kind of meant, that you can't really predict future hauntings, as he said. So in this sense, you're never able to grasp the full truth. I know as well, I think if you want to take the more phenomenological route, this is a risk here. I can't see a couch in its entirety. I can only see kind of one angle of it based on where I am. But this has a lot more to do, I guess, with perception. Like I can't like unfold the couch and kind of see it from all of the angles. But this is obviously a different type of full truth interpretation. I'm taking a bit more of a semiotic, I guess, approach to this. That it's going to be more based off of the past signs you've been exposed to, and then it will change based off of your future signs.
Okay, can I just thank you? Very, very good. Just a short comment. Mm-hmm. Well, try to think that if someone is thinking about something that is considered to be a fully meaningful or some isolated unit of a sign of itself, that's the paradox. And Derrida pointing just about that is well, yes, we are willing to think like that, but this is a problem. So, and also the problem is to think something that is like you said, how to put it? I mean that well, the same paradox would be to think there is some to essentialize something, as truly absent or truly negative. That's the same problem. Like we are often do in a positive way. So I think Derrida tried to just skating on the edge or very thin ice. So I would be quite careful to say, well. Because like the true meaning, it's never in the present, or what does it mean, the true meaning or full meaning? Yeah, it's and also the way when we say there is no true meaning is kind of essential standpoint. So and how we can get off this trap. That this is, I think, this program, and I think that there are two modes. Let's say he's criticizing Plato, for example. Well, where the speech which is embodied is presence, and it's also another. You said that it's a mapping of the world, or like for Plato, the speech is more, let's say, connected to the presence of the time, to your body and to your friends and community. So it's one thing. The second is structuralism, where the meaning is given only static structure, which is a structure. So there's another problem he went into. Yeah. So my point is, I would be more careful also speaking about something that is non-present, because essentializing a non-presence is one is lead the same trap of the metaphysic of presence when you're posing something as ungraspable, and so on. So that's just my point, that to perhaps be more cautious and careful of reading Derrida. But thank you. It was a really interesting presentation. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you so much for the comments.
I think also it's worthy to mention that, Connor, this topic for you, this is a first exploration lately, right, in this topic. So
This is my first reading of Derrida.
okay, so that's also an interesting social experiment for people who have read more of him to see what is the first reading of this author.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely.
Admiring that. Great.
Continue. No, cool. Okay, so Josh is from home, from Barlova, from Tartu, having a question, and I saw that you already had a question in the chat.
Yeah, but it already got answered. Can you hear me okay? Because there's music.
You're jamming out over there, man.
There's music in the background. Cheers to you all. Simone says hi.
Hi.
Yeah, that was a fantastic presentation, Connor. Thank you. I'm actually quite new to Derrida myself, so as Elvira is rightly saying, I appreciate your first delve into it. I guess just a top level question has to do with, there's a lots of focus on difference and especially in structuralism, difference, but I really love, what stood out to me is this phrase, preference of path. I really like that in combination with superposition and transparency. There's a lot of metaphors there that we can talk about next week when I'll be there. But I'm really interested in your impression at this early stage in your investigation between maybe the tension between difference and preference of path, because I think there's sort of a almost Persian like affinity or sympathy in the notion of preference of path juxtaposed against all these notions of difference. Could you comment on any of the readings you had that might grapple or at least acknowledge that's the simultaneity of that tension between the two different modes of being? Thanks.
Yes, so I dug to try to find an easy answer to look through that, just as much as I looked for a definition of trace, which I guess I'm sure as you're aware, Josh, and as Nick is aware too, like you will never find. But so yeah, I unfortunately I've only read, or I've read, of course, a little bit on top of Freud and the scene of writing. However, yeah, preference of path is still something I'm quite unfamiliar with, because just becoming acquainted with difference was quite, well, not quite a task, of course. I mean, coming from semiotics, but it's definitely something I'm interested in finding out more about. Actually, there's a new book that we got here all about Derrida that I'll be reading this week. So I'd love to discuss that more with you maybe next week, so we can kind of figure that out.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay. Hello to Barlova and to Simone. So we are more than one person from Tartu here also. So very cool. Okay. So, and then there's a question from Bogdana. I am not sure about the stress, but
Hello, can you hear me?
yes, and everything is great.
Hi, thank you, Connor, for the interesting presentation. I was really happy to hear a take on Derrida in this series. I was sure that there must be something on writing in Derrida, so thank you for your interesting presentation. I don't have a question, but I will make a suggestion, a reading suggestion for where to find the definition of trace in dark writing.
Yes, please.
Yes, it's kind of very easy. It's of course, of grammatology. So the book on grammatology is practically on writing, so on Derrida's concept of writing. And there you will find the definition of arc writing and how it relates to trace. So I would say that arc writing is not as close to langue as you suggested, but rather to différence itself. And différence in its turn, it's nothing like difference in Saussure or in any structuralist way. So maybe if you check out grammatology, it will get clearer. And another suggestion is, to me, this is the easiest entrance to Derrida's thought. It's one of his articles, a later one, from, I believe, somewhere in the late 70s, so it was written much later. It's called Signature Event Context, and it's published in his book Limited Ink. So here I see that Limited Ink was published 1988, but I think that some of the texts were written earlier, and there is this, maybe you know something about it, there is this controversy between Derrida and John Searle. So this book is like the outcome of this, I don't know how to put it, it's not a quarrel, but a discussion between the two. So if you start with signature event context, it will get much easier. So it's really very, very accessible for beginners. Sorry if I was too I don't know. I'm only giving suggestion, and I don't really have a real question. But thank you once again for your interesting presentation and for the I don't know, the courage to present your first reading of Derrida to us. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Bogdana, for the comments. And yes, absolutely, because my reading past is completely structuralist. It's Saussure, Trubetskoy, Peirce. So absolutely, I think after reading your recommendations, I'll have a different understanding. I'm a few decades behind, I guess. I need to catch up with the post-structuralists to find out more about this.
Great, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, all the also comments, and this is fantastic to share the knowledge at this moment and expand it. Yes, Ludmila has a question. Yes.
Yeah.
Or a comment, or
I have both.
Okay.
Fantastic.
So first of all, I want to defend Connor because Bogdana, and hi to Bogdana, and I understand in what way Connor actually said that writing is more like Lang, even though it's very untraditional reading. But I think I understand how you meant it. So, and it's related to what Alan was talking about, and I can see Alan is still with us, so that's great. He made it. But so if you read Pharmacology and Connor, it is on our reading list, so you can get to it eventually.
Wonderful.
But if you read the first book of the first part of that book, actually is telling about language evolution, and so you mean that writing is more like line because it's the capacity of formulating thoughts and making references. Regardless of the modality or the sound system we use. So it's not necessarily like speech in your speech. And that is what Saussure maybe implied, but in Saussure it's actually more oriented towards the very language, whereas in Derrida it's more like extended language. So I think you are actually right in your reading. And I'm also not an expert in Derrida, but I really like your reading of him. And so he gives two examples in the first part of the book. One is that language evolved from music, or the second one, it evolved from gestures. So either it's more visual or it's more musical, auditive, but it's not in the linearity of the speech. So yeah, so I would agree with your reading partially. I can see where are you like aiming at with that. And my question is,
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But yeah, having a new reading is a good thing. That's what Derrida would want.
yeah,
Okay.
Deconstruction as a principle is to read in as many ways as possible to subvert the normal norms of reading.
I see.
So,
I see.
By
Yes.
having a new reading, you're actually kind of in a good position because you don't have all these biases of like the history of how we read
And how to
Derrida.
approach it. Okay.
Because it's like with Peirce, everybody has very specific interpretations of them that kind of maybe lead them too far in one direction when they could have read it in a different light. So anyway, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah. And finally, my question is, can you maybe explain in what way for you Derrida is anti-glottocentric? For Ivan here again.
Anti-glottocentric. Yes. Well, I would say Derrida is anti-glottocentric in the same way, in a very similar way that he is logocentric. Because I don't think, from my reading of Freud and the scene of writing, it seems to me that Derrida does not really see language as the kind of central or kind of, and of course this is still because of I'm still influenced by Saussure when I say this, but language is just kind of one institution of science, not the central one. It's the one that we kind of, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of a way to word this, that we have this archie-writing, this ability to make and interpret meaning and to model the world around us. And if we just kind of this is very hard for me to put into words, that the speech, that language is maybe just a product of that archie-writing, and that it doesn't necessarily have to be language. That's what I think his idea from that essay was. This, again, is me coming from having read Saussure, Trubetskoy, and Peirce, and only the scene of writing in Freud, and not yet of grammatology, and of course, not yet having read, maybe Husserl or Hegel, for the more phenomenological aspect of this. I hope that satisfies.
I think it's super nice that there is this reading of you, because like it's an example of you're not born with all this knowledge and all this information, so you are slowly discovering it. And this presentation is also like a very nice example how you, like, step by step, I guess in 5-10 years, this conversation will be completely different.
Much difference.
But I was thinking about this the thing that like this language, I have not read any of these authors. Just guys, we have one mic for everyone, so if like we share it as like, so if we are allowed, then we are allowed. Just okay, this was very bad technical interlude, but so yes, this idea about the language, I'm curious about because last semi so long I was presenting my research that I've been doing for a little bit of time, and now continuing to explore about writing and language as in performance arts, where actually writing and language make not that much sense. Because in dance and in choreography and in circus, movement, writing down movement in like these big thick descriptions, it's more like an ethnographic thing than actually practically used. So writing as a tool has a different meaning. So it's not as symbolic, it's more like, let's see how far we can get with the Persian analysis of this, but I'm also learning how to use this tool. And I'm thinking, like, my question, as far as you've met these authors, have you like met some ideas about embodiment, or like, oh, maybe it's also a question to other people in the audience who have read these authors, because as I've noticed in the research of performance studies and my focus is on circus, so seeing how circus people try to come into academia, they very easily slip into psychoanalysis, phenomenology, and it's an interesting political situation because they are trying to, their whole life is trying to escape language and to return to embodiment. But when they want to legitimize their knowledge, they go into this extremely heavy stuff, like directly. So it's like trying to jump, a lot of steps. That's what I've noticed academically. So, but overall, the question, because the embodiment theory and like these analyses, they are also about like going slightly away from language as the main tool of communication.
I am really, really, really happy that you brought this up, because I didn't have time to kind of bring this into my presentation, or I didn't know how to connect it. So my exposure to embodiment has been through Lakoff. I completely agree. And of course, I'm only a bachelor's student. I haven't studied neurology, but I have this kind of idea that, yes, we have this kind of system of understanding that goes way beyond language and more to our almost primal evolutionary needs of spatial temporal recognition, and kind of everything being understood through there. Embodiment, I have read only through Lakoff. And,
but in these authors that you were presenting, they don't speak about these things.
Derrida doesn't talk about embodiment.
No.
Okay.
He's talked about phenomenology, but that's more Merleau-Ponty phenomenology, I would say.
Because
Derrida,
for me, is the question like, okay, if we say that language is not the perfect tool how to describe the meaning, what is, like we can go, because embodiment theory tries to fill this gap. Embodiment theory saying this, it's very I'm saying big thing, not knowing if this thing is real, like a unicorn, but kind of they are trying to find the meaning and not being so critical, but giving like, okay, it's not there, but we can find it there.
Foucault's more about the body than Derrida. Derrida doesn't write very much about the body at all.
Okay.
Like ever.
But at the same time, we kind of have the tendency, like especially of this modern digital age, to bring the embodiment back into it, and the mind kind of like filling in the gaps. For example, like when you are using emojis to express some sort of bodily movement that you would normally do because you don't have yourself physically present, because you are some kind of like removed from the embodiment, you make it virtual. And since you add emojis, for example, like winking, you associate it with yourself. So like there are certain ways that I would say that the embodiment is making its way back into language to substitute for when you don't actually have the body present. So like maybe it's making like a comeback in a way. Or like, because language is like writing is this like not only incredible tool, but it is also very like malleable, very, very changeable. That only that we have these like established rules how writing should look, and therefore we like hold on to them very like have the tendency to hold on to them in a very rigid way. But at the same time, like the transformation of language that is happening, and writing that is happening, when kind of like a lot of people have access to it, to writing every day, like messaging with our friends, writing emails and all the stuff, that like we can see the change happening in real time.
Yeah. Cool. And we have time for one last question. If there is one last question, I saw Arlene trying to turn into a video from picture, but if not,
Thanks. Thanks. I did not have any questions,
okay.
but I have been a good boy and listened carefully to this really insightful and coherent talk. Thank you.
What time is it over there?
3 a.m.
Oh,
Sheesh, man.
3 a.m. Okay, so
I don't know you, but you owe me a drink.
There you go. Certainly.
Next
Come
time
almost
we meet.
on me. There you go.
Perfect. Okay, so if there is no questions, Josh, maybe.
He's back with the camera.
No.
Yes? No?
I think he's just
He only
chilling.
turned his camera on for questions, so.
There you
No,
go.
I just turned my camera on to say goodbye.
Okay, yes, we are a little bit also completely fair. We're a little bit over time. So thank you all for coming and see you in 2 weeks when we will have our next speakers and soon you will receive messages. And if you want to reach out to the speakers of today, let us know and you can keep in contact and see you in 2 weeks. Thank you so much.
Thanks, you guys.
He's got emojis. Yeah, how do you do that? I need to know that first.
You know, on some Apple